I know, I look good. Good afternoon and welcome to ThinkTech Asia. It's Tuesday, July 28th, 2015. I'm your host, Keith Bettinger. A little later on in today's program, we'll be welcoming our guest, Bikram Ghosh, who joins us today in ThinkTech studio here in downtown Honolulu, Hawaii. Bikram is the Deputy Chief of Party of the United States Agency for International Development's Adapt-Asia Pacific initiative, which is working to increase resilience to climate change in urban areas throughout the Asia-Pacific region. We're especially happy to have Bikram here today, as he's normally headquartered in Bangkok, Thailand. But through fortunate and serendipitous circumstance, he's made time to join us today. So we'll be discussing climate change impacts on urban areas in the region, along with some challenges associated with adapting to these impacts. We'll also talk about governance and finance and climate change. So it's going to be an exciting and fascinating program. We're glad you could join us. And in addition to our live stream, the program will be uploaded to YouTube later today. So if any of your friends and loved ones somehow missed the program, they can watch later. And as always, if you have any Asia-related events to publicize, please contact me at keiththinktech@gmail.com. You can also send me questions directly, comments directly during the show to my Twitter at KCC Geography. Again, that's at KCC Geography. So our news summary this week starts with Malaysia, where Prime Minister Najib Razak dismissed several cabinet ministers and his deputy prime minister. The Monday ministerial massacre, or 3M, is a result of fallout from a fiduciary malfeasance scandal at the government's state investment fund, Malaysia Development Berhad. Now, former Deputy Prime Minister Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin had been openly critical of PM Najib's handling of Prime Minister Najib. The teleprompter is too small. I should have, okay. Stating that the affair could cause the ruling United Malay National Organization Party to lose the next election. UMNO has had a stranglehold on Malaysian politics since the country gained independence in 1957. He was replaced by Home Affairs Minister Zahid Hamidi, a right-leaning politician. Now, Malaysia Development Berhad is a strategic development company owned by the government of Malaysia. And it was established to promote foreign direct investment through partnerships in strategic sectors. The fund currently has debts of more than $11 billion and is being investigated for financial mismanagement and graft. Earlier this month, the Wall Street Journal reported that investigators had linked nearly $700 million in deposits to personal accounts associated with the Prime Minister, though Najib and the company have both denied taking any money for personal gain. The cabinet reshuffle also witnessed the departure of Attorney General Abdul Ghani Patel, who had led the investigation into Malaysia Development Berhad. Rural and Regional Development Minister Shafi Abdal and Senior Ministers Govindasamy and Hassan Malik and Ewan Ibn as well were dismissed. Now on to South Asia, where India is in the midst of mourning the death of former Prime Minister APJ Abdul Kalam, who passed away from cardiac arrest on Monday at the age of 83. APJ Abdul Kalam was the 11th president of India, serving from 2002 to 2007. Kalam, born in 1931, was a scientist turned politician. Born into humble circumstance, he began working at an early age to supplement his family's income. After earning a degree in mathematics, Kalam moved to Madras to study aerospace engineering at the Madras Institute of Technology. In university, he studied physics and aerospace engineering and spent 4 decades as a scientist and space administrator, working for both the Defense Research and Development Organization and the Indian Space Research Organization. He is known as India's Missile Man for the pivotal role he played in the development of India's nuclear weapons program. He was elected president in 2002, with support coming from both the ruling Bharatiya Janata Party and the main opposition party, the Indian National Congress. After his term expired, he returned to academia and public service. In 2012, he founded a youth program called the What Can I Give movement, which aimed to instill anti-corruption values in children. He enjoyed writing Tamil poetry and playing the Vinay. He said in an interview in 1998 that he originally became fascinated with flight while watching birds on the island of Rameshwaram, where he grew up. Now on to East Asia, where stocks continued to plummet in China, dropping approximately 10% over the first half of this week. This week's losses bring July's total losses to $3.25 trillion. Now, to put this into perspective, this number represents a value greater than France's total stock market capitalization. The drop comes in the wake of government efforts to prop up stock prices by stopping trading, delaying initial public offerings, and injecting more than $40 billion in stimulus money into the market, and also preventing some large shareholders from selling off equities. Analysts have mixed reactions as to how the free fall will affect everyday Chinese people. Stocks currently account for 9% of household wealth. Now, to put this in perspective, in the United States, that figure is approximately 30%. And so relatively few regular Chinese people were severely impacted by this week's decline. However, other analysts fear that the continuing downturn and the government's failed efforts to control it, could damage the overall Chinese economy and undermine confidence in the central government to make and implement effective financial policies. Moreover, despite the relatively small numbers of investors said to be in the range of 90 million people, in the lead up to the current bear market, more than 170,000 new trading accounts were being opened every day, a figure representing 10 times the number of new accounts opened up in 2014, raising fears that irrational exuberance might undermine longer-term growth in the Chinese market. Okay, now on to our interview, and now that I'm past the difficult names, we can get down to business. Today on the program, we're going to turn to probably the most important issue of our time, climate change. Now, here in Hawaii, we know a lot about climate change and vulnerability to climate change, but on this program, we're going to be talking about climate change's impacts and vulnerability in urban areas in Asia. So we're really pleased to be joined today by Bikram Ghosh. Bikram is an urban specialist with a career spanning more than 15 years in international development. Currently, he serves as Deputy Chief of Party on the USAID-funded Adapt-Asia Pacific program, leading all program operations and oversight for design and delivery of capacity-building activities, as well as communication and outreach. So Mr. Ghosh's expertise is in community-driven development planning, including community mobilization, slum upgrading, community infrastructure and development, access to finance, local government strengthening and capacity building, and land tenure formalization. A majority of his work has been focused on risk reduction and resilience building of low-income and vulnerable communities in urban areas. He has worked on programs with multiple donor organizations, including the United States Agency for International Development, the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, UN Habitat, the United Nations Development Program, and the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Mr. Ghosh has significant field experience in Asia, including India, Afghanistan, Thailand, Indonesia, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan. He has a master's degree in governmental administration with a certificate in public finance from the University of Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, and a bachelor's degree in urban planning from the School of Planning and Architecture in New Delhi in India. Well, Bikram, it's really a pleasure to have you here today, and I hope that you are enjoying your time in Hawaii and experiencing all the aloha that we have to offer here. And we want to express our aloha to you for being on the program today, for taking time away from your vacation. So let's go ahead and get started, shall we? Okay. So my first question, in the lead up here, I've mentioned USAID's Adapt-Asia Pacific project a couple of times. This is a big project. Yeah, it's a huge initiative. Could you tell us a little bit about it, about the components of this program? What's it all about? And what does it aim to do?
Well, first of all, thank you, Keith. Thank you for inviting me on the show. I really appreciate being invited, and I'm really enjoying myself in Hawaii. It's a great place, my first time here.
Yeah.
So aloha to all your viewers out there. So the Adapt-Asia Pacific project, the USAID Adapt-Asia Pacific project, it's a 5-year project funded by the US government, the Agency for International Development. We cover 27 countries, 13 in Asia and 14 of the Pacific small island developing countries. So total is 27 countries. We are not present in all 27 countries at the same time. We work on an on-demand basis. The project really works in four areas. The first is to, well, let me step back. The overall objective of the project is to really provide knowledge and information sharing about climate change adaptation and climate change adaptation finance, which is a really dire need in the region. It works through four components. The first is supporting a regional Asia Pacific adaptation network. It's called the Asia Pacific Adaptation Network, or APAN. It's a network of practitioners in climate change adaptation. The second, along with that, is to support an annual forum of adaptation professionals in the region. The third is what we call the capacity building program, which we'll be talking more about. We have various programs for government as well as non-profit capacity building. And finally, the last component is technical assistance for project preparation, which is really the core of the project. It is to help countries access financing for climate change adaptation.
Wow. So it's a comprehensive approach.
Yeah, it's a pretty comprehensive approach. We tend to, our niche is to fill a gap where the services for project preparation really don't exist in the region.
So when you talk about project preparation, can you be a little bit more specific about that? What sorts of projects?
That's a great question. So when you hear project preparation, you tend to think about large infrastructure projects. And while that is a part of our overall program, really the focus is to look at countries and what they're doing in the adaptation space. So if it's, communities on the coast doing mangrove projects, or, communities on the river basin doing, being resilient to droughts or excessive flooding, we help the local government or maybe even the state government put together a project proposal that would be financed by either a vertical fund, by that I mean either Green Climate Fund or the Adaptation Fund, or through a multilateral agency like the Asian Development Bank or the World Bank.
Oh.
So our focus is really on governments preparing better project proposals so they can qualify for these various streams of financing that
I see. So that's really interesting. It seems like you mentioned local governments. And it seems like we're both familiar with the World Bank and how they operate.
Mm-hmm.
And I can imagine that to local level governments, just navigating the maze of the World Bank and all of these, the regulations and procedures that they have would seem somewhat Byzantine and difficult to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
So this program is really trying to build a bridge between where the need is at the local level and at the international level where the assistance is located.
Yes, that is one part of it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at the local level, what most people don't understand is that there is already a lot of funding that goes into climate change adaptation.
Mm-hmm.
Countries have programs, local governments have budgets, state governments have budgets, and often the urban planner or the city budget officer doesn't know of these programs going into his next budget planning cycle. So our approach is to kind of take a comprehensive approach and look at a community and see, okay, you have a project idea. Mm-hmm. How do you go about seeing what are the different sources of finance that are available? And have you exhausted all your sources of finance before you start thinking about World Bank or ADB or Adaptation Fund or Green Climate Fund? And if you do start thinking about that, how do you navigate that? What is your coordination agency at the national government level, and is the national government already working with one of these funds to access program funding? So yes, a little bit of navigating that, and also, encouraging local governments and city governments to look at what else is available in the country.
So it seems like it's not about telling local governments what to do, right, or what they need to do, but it's about helping them to link up capacity to carry out their own needs that they've already identified. Yeah? Would that be an accurate statement?
That is an accurate statement. We are not helping city governments do climate change adaptation strategies. That could be a part of the program, but the focus of the program is to look at when city governments have project ideas, how you would go about finding
So
financing.
they've come with the ideas already?
Yeah.
I see.
They would come with ideas.
So we're going to take our first break, yeah? We'll be back in just a moment. We'll
Okay.
continue with this discussion. This is ThinkTech Asia. I'm Keith Bettinger, and we're joined today by Bikram Ghosh. We'll be back in just a moment. Thank you for tuning in today.
This is Alice Lee Hagan, host of ThinkTech Hawaii Business Education Spotlight. My show here at ThinkTech Hawaii is every Thursday from 3 to 4 in the afternoon. I bring in interesting guests from Hawaii, the mainland, and hopefully international guests in the future. Do join us on Thursday from 3 to 4 p.m. ThinkTech Hawaii Business Education Spotlight. Aloha.
Aloha, how you doing? I'm Gordo the Tech Czar, here on ThinkTech Hawaii, where we co-host Hibachi Talk, where we talk about technology and bring in all kinds of cool guests. Also, my co-host with me today is
Andrew the security guy. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching ThinkTech Hawaii, and thanks for watching Hibachi Talk. We also have Angus.
And you there, lad. It's Angus. I bring in all kinds of wee things. Oh, look, you see my lips moving.
Okay, that commercial really makes me smile, seeing the dummy. Welcome back to ThinkTech Asia. My name's Keith Bettinger, and we're joined today by Bikram Ghosh. And we're talking about climate change and adaptation in the Asia Pacific region, local needs, international capacity building, and challenges of governance associated with adapting to climate change and building resilience at the local level. And a moment ago, we were talking about some of the basics of USAID's Adapt-Asia Pacific program. Now, one question that I have for you, and this program is all about, our television program is all about Asia, but your program is too. Global warming is happening all over the world, but this program prioritizes 27 countries in Asia and in the Pacific. Are there special climate change challenges in Asia and in the Pacific region? And is this part of it, because it's a U.S. government program or U.S. government supported program, is this part of a broader U.S. emphasis on Asia?
I don't know whether it's a broader emphasis on Asia, but there's of course a very genuine need in the Asia Pacific region. And I think while USAID has a global program on climate change and climate change adaptation, the focus in Asia in this case is because of the obvious reasons. Asia has high concentrations of people living in tidal and river basin areas, which are extremely vulnerable to climate change. And
there's a significant amount of population growth taking place there,
in those areas. The Pacific Islands, of course, everybody knows the story over there. They have been hugely affected by climate change, intensifying storms, rising water levels. Some of these countries' very existence has been threatened by climate change. Actually, initially when the program was designed, it was supposed to be an Asia-only program, and given the work that we were doing, we were extended into the Pacific countries. But in Asia, we continue to focus on, the most vulnerable countries. It's Philippines, Indonesia, Laos, Cambodia, which have, the Mekong region, and all the countries, including South Asia. Actually, we work in India as well. We don't work in Afghanistan, Pakistan, but we work in India, Bangladesh, those countries as well. So yeah, I think it goes back mainly to two main factors. One is these large population concentration areas, and a lot of these countries are, very much lower down the development spectrum and have very low capacities in terms of dealing with climate change.
So their vulnerability is a function not only of their physical geography and location, but it's also a function of socioeconomic conditions as well.
Yeah.
And so the program, the USAID program, aims to tackle both of these, right?
Yeah.
Well, I guess you can't change it. You can't move the country.
We can't move the country.
But aims to incorporate the socioeconomic considerations into development projects, yeah?
Yeah, our focus on capacity building is very much that. It's about building capacity of governments that have traditionally been weak in the governance structure. So, countries like Cambodia, Laos, even Bangladesh, where governance has not been a strong forte of local governments. That's where we introduce our capacity building programs. And, a good example is the economics of climate change adaptation, where, local governments don't really consider actually economics of climate change adaptation works with national governments. National governments are really not considering the economic impacts of climate change that they're going to be facing. And we are working with 10 countries hands-on. We are actually helping them to look at projections, climate models, but downscaling that data to their specific needs and looking at the economic impact this would have on a long-term basis, and therefore producing policy briefs where they would inform policymakers how to reverse or change their policies related to climate change adaptation.
So you mentioned Laos and Cambodia and also Indonesia. And anybody that specializes in Southeast Asia, the Philippines, knows that these countries are not known for their good governance and transparency. A lot of them have a history of authoritarianism, which is not really conducive to transparency and accountability. And so my question is, have you experienced some success in these places in building up governance in these countries?
Yes, I think that what you're saying about governance and governance frameworks and governance structures in these countries is true. A lot of these countries suffer from weak local governance and weak governance overall. And I think that's where the urgency for climate change adaptation becomes even more acute, because you're talking about situations where basic infrastructure is already not being provided, and then this infrastructure comes under threat of climate change or climate variability. Take, for example, the Philippines. When the cyclone hit, it was one of the worst ever. But the rebuilding effort is so much slower because the effective governance systems are not in place. So our aim or our approach in those situations is to kind of look at the project preparation cycle and look at where we can add value to these communities trying to rebuild. And if you talk about success, we've had some significant success over the years. Our project's actually been in operation almost 4 full years, and we're going into our last year of our project in September. We've worked in 13 large-scale projects. And one of them, for example, the Valenzuela city example in Philippines, which is part of Metro Manila. They were designing a stormwater drainage project, which is to deal with the excessive flooding that Valenzuela is seeing over time, with Metro Manila being flooded many times over the last few years. And in designing the project, there was really no heed paid to climate change and how those projections might affect Valenzuela in the long term. And we looked at that and we helped the city kind of redefine the project objectives. But a step back again, the city didn't really think about what the financing options could be when they went into project design. And that was one of our key value adds, was to come in and say, have you thought about where you could get financing with this project? And initially, of course, all cities started to think big. They think about the Adaptation Fund or the Global Climate Fund. In reality, Philippines does not have the mechanism to access those funds. Countries need to have accredited organizations at the national level to access these funds. And Philippines does not have that. So actually, the GCF or the Adaptation Fund is not an option for Valenzuela. So we actually looked at World Bank and ADB projects that were already in their design phases, which could co-opt into a project like Valenzuela. And we are in advanced stages of discussions with both those organizations, and hopefully by next year, we will have a situation where Valenzuela has financing for its stormwater.
So what you seem to be referring to is the mainstreaming of climate change adaptation considerations into the existing development pipeline. And you mentioned that there's a lot of money that goes into development, not just in Southeast Asia, not just in Asia, but all over the world. Huge infrastructure projects. And in many cases, these are lacking any kind of attention to the medium and longer term impacts of climate change. And so these development projects, their effectiveness risks being kind of undercut by that. Now, based on the experiences in Asia and these program successes like in Valenzuela, do you think that there's anything that can be generalized to the rest of the world?
Well, that really has been our focus for this last year, and of course the final year of the project, is really to take these lessons and create long-term sustainable programs that other places can access. So
outside of Asia?
Initially within Asia and then outside of Asia, like the urban climate change and resilience training program that we've been working on is to kind of draw on these lessons from our past 3-4 years of work and kind of do a training module that is accessible by government officials across the region and eventually globally, really. I mean, once these things go online, anybody anywhere can actually access them. And it's really about looking at that planning officer or that infrastructure civil engineer sitting in a municipality and thinking, what is he thinking when he's designing a project? I mean, he's doing a stormwater drainage project, he's doing a water supply project. What is he thinking? Is he thinking of climate change adaptation? If he's not, well, what should he be thinking about? And then starting from that basic premise, taking climate change data, downscaling it all the way through formulating a good project proposal, those are the kinds of trainings that we are looking at.
Right.
And we're actually also bringing online another training program that would actually take direct lessons from our project preparation work in Asia and Pacific and be a training program about project preparation itself.
Wow. So it actually goes beyond climate change. It's a strengthening of governance, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, I think governance and climate change go hand in hand. I mean, as I said, you're already in a situation where cities and counties don't have proper infrastructure. There's weak infrastructure, and they are being hit by the climate change impacts. So they have to really go hand in hand for them to, really have an impact.
Sure, that makes sense. Now, when we look at climate change adaptation in Asia, there are a lot of organizations that are active. So Mercy Corps is in all over the place. Or the Rockefeller Foundation, there are 100 resilient cities and Asian climate change cities for climate change resilience network. And UN Habitat has work going on now. So there are a number of different organizations doing similar initiatives. What is the niche of USAID's program in the region? What does it do that other programs don't? And does it complement the other programs? Is there kind of this working together amongst the different donors?
We do work with actually a lot of the organizations you mentioned. We work with the 100RC, we work with ACERN, we work with a whole lot of other organizations in the region. I think the niche of ADAPT is its core focus on project preparation and project finance. We are looking at climate change projects, how they can be better. How can better project proposals come through, and how can we meet them with financing? And again, in the world of climate change adaptation financing, there is this big world of the big funds, the Global Climate Fund, which is $100 billion, and then there are these little cities with their, $10 million projects, and how do you bridge that gap? And I think that is what our expertise is, to, work with countries and their city governments in getting those projects access to the Global Climate the Green Climate Fund, money, and building that mechanism and therefore the capacity of the country to kind of access those funds. That's the work we're doing in the Pacific, where we're working with SPREP, which is the Pacific Regional Organization, and we are helping them look at countries and look at project pipelines from these countries. We get involved in an early stage, even in generating project ideas, and then filtering them through as to what would qualify as climate change and what would not, and then qualifying them across the GCF criteria. Our work in India with NABARD, which is the National Agricultural Development Bank, is in accessing the Adaptation Fund money, which works a little bit differently. They allocate an amount of money for each country. India has $10 million to access, and they needed to prepare good projects to access that money. We worked with NABARD to prepare 3 projects that have already been approved by the Adaptation Fund now, and a 4th project that's in the pipeline to be approved by the Adaptation Fund in the next board meeting.
I see.
So that's where we come in.
So that fund in India, you said $10 million. Is that a domestic fund?
No, it's the Adaptation Fund. It's the global.
The International Adaptation Fund.
Yeah.
So we've got the Adaptation Fund, and then there's the Green Climate Fund, and a number of other World Bank related funds, funds that are managed by the World Bank. And it seems like when we look at the numbers, that there's a lot of money out there. However, when we look at the need and the estimates for how much adaptation is going to cost in the future, there's really, it's mismatched.
Yeah.
It doesn't link up. So it's very clear that international money is not going to be sufficient for adaptation anytime soon. So is it a hopeless situation, or what can be done about that? You mentioned mobilizing local resources earlier. can we expect local resources, national and subnational resources to kind of make up that shortfall?
Well, if you look at the numbers, the UNFCCC estimated the need between 2010 and 2050 to be $100 billion a year. Now, that's a really big number.
Per year.
Per year, yeah.
So that's $40 trillion, $4 trillion? $4 trillion.
$4 trillion, yeah. But right now, it's the amount of funding that the parties have pledged to is to the tune of $20 to $30 billion a year, ramping up to the $100 billion a year till about 2020. Now, I'm not exactly sure where we are on those targets, but those are all very big numbers. And it's highly unlikely that just through these international financing mechanisms that we'll get anywhere close to it. So I think we have to do what traditionally has been done with financing infrastructure, is talk about how we can mobilize local resources, co-opting government programs, and of course the private sector. And the private sector is a huge pool of resources. We saw in Thailand after the flooding came through, the supply chains of Honda and Toyota were dramatically impacted.
Sure.
And in the aftermath, the Honda and Toyota, guess what? They worked with the government in making climate resiliency more, mainstreamed. And now that's the kind of partnerships that we're talking about in the future, where we talk about the private sector coming together with the public sector in meeting some of these needs.
Right. Okay, well, we're going to take another break. When we come back, I'd like to ask you to follow up on the private sector. That's a fascinating topic, but we'll get to that in just a moment. So this is this is not Adapt-Asia. This is ThinkTech Asia. I'm Keith Benninger. We'll be back in just a moment. Thank you for joining us today.
Aloha, my name is Miley Scarpino, and I'm the host of the Empower Hour. If you're interested in health, nutrition, fitness, here on the island of Oahu, want to learn more about places to train at or different trainers available, then watch my show on Fridays at 3. We have a great time, and I hope that you'll come join us. Much aloha. Now go get swole.
Aloha, I'm Kili'i Akina, president of the Grassroot Institute and host on Ehana Kako, a weekly program on the ThinkTech Hawaii broadcast network. Ehana Kako means let's work together. Think of the sad alternative, let's not work together. Here in Hawaii, with all of our diversity and the richness of the people, it's important for us to come together around issues on the basis of what's right and what's good and what's going to serve the common good. And that's what we try to do at Ehana Kako. Every week, we interview movers and shakers, people in government, business, and other sectors of society to talk about how to create together a better government, economy, a better world here in Hawaii that can bless the rest of the world. I thank you for your attention to ThinkTech Hawaii, and we look forward to seeing you every Monday, 2 to 3 p.m. on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. We're Ehana Kako, and we wish you well. Aloha.
We can talk about whatever you want.
Oh, that's fine. Just go with this. Yeah.
All right, welcome back to ThinkTech Asia. My name is Keith Benninger, and we're talking about climate change adaptation in the Asia Pacific region, specifically about United States Agency for International Development initiative to build capacity at the local level for increasing resilience and adaptation to climate change. And we're joined by Bikram Ghosh today. Thanks again for being here. So a moment ago, we were talking about the private sector. That's a very interesting topic. But you also mentioned that this program has been, I think this is your 4th year?
Yes.
4th year that you're in right now. That's a long time. And it's a big multifaceted and very ambitious effort. So what sorts of unexpected challenges and maybe opportunities have you encountered while working on this program?
The premise of the program when it was being designed was that there is a lot of money that is coming into climate change adaptation, and countries are not being able to design the proper projects to meet those, to kind of access those funds. When we started doing the project, we did an initial survey and analysis to look at what was actually going on. And the reality is that in the Asia Pacific region, countries were not actually set up to access these funds. I mean, at that time, the Green Climate Fund had not come into being, but there was the Adaptation Fund, there were a couple of other funds. And really, countries needed a mechanism to flow those funds to the local organizations, the local municipalities or the nonprofits that prepare these projects. And that mechanism was not in place. The only country to have that mechanism in place was NABARD in India. So our initial work started by working with NABARD and working with other countries to see which of these countries wanted to get accreditation. So the Philippines was one country where we worked with the Department of Finance in seeking accreditation for the TOF. Now, since then, the story has changed a little bit, and with the Green Climate Fund coming on board, a lot of different organizations have got accredited. So, for example, in the Pacific, SPREP has got accredited. Then UN
Say that again?
SPREP.
Okay.
SPREP is an organization in the Pacific, which is a regional organization, and it covers all the 14 Pacific small island developing countries.
I see.
And SPREP has been accredited as a mechanism the Green Climate Fund can flow its money through to the Pacific countries. In the Asia region, ADB has become accredited with the Green Climate Fund, and so has UNDP. So a lot of our work initially was with these multilateral developing agencies like the UNDP and the ADB to kind of shore up the project preparation work and the project finance work. And as we have done that, we've kind of transitioned into working directly with the countries. So, so now we've been doing that with the Ministry of Environment in Cambodia. We've done some work with, we're starting some work in Bangladesh. We've been working all across the region. Our transition has been from those development agencies into directly working with the countries and their governments and the ministries at the countries. Again, our work goes back to how do you access these funds, how do these funds flow through, and how do we build capacity of these countries in understanding climate change finance and accessing funds and developing good projects.
So the architecture of these funds is a little bit complex, yeah?
Yeah.
So you get the fund, and in order to access the fund, you have to have some sort of accreditation.
Yeah.
You have to meet the requirements. And if I understand correctly, there are multilateral agencies that are serving as the accredited agencies, and then countries are going through those multilaterals to access the funds.
Yeah.
And but there's a transition happening whereby countries themselves are becoming accredited so they can directly access funds. Now, it seems to me, just on a very superficial level of analysis, that if you have the UNDP, if you have the Asian Development Bank, it's kind of this middleman. It increases the transaction cost between the country and the fund. Is that an accurate assumption? What's the advantage of going through the multilateral?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, I would hate to say that these multilateral agencies are middlemen. They are more. They add value on their end as well. I mean, when the ADB is designing a project, it could co-opt one of these funds. So, I mean, ADB can put in its own money and then co-opt some of the funding that comes through the Green Climate Fund or through the Adaptation Fund.
So it's a leveraging thing.
It's a leveraging thing, but also remember that these organizations have had the capacity to design projects for years and years. I mean, ADB has been doing loan financing, 50, 60 years at this point of time, and they have the capacity to design good projects. So, they add, ADB has this organization called the CDIA, which is the Cities Development Initiative of the ADB, and they really focus on project preparation.
I see.
So they add their own value while doing that. And often, working with UNDP or ADB or even USAID, they're not just looking at a country issue, they're looking at a regional issue. So for example, USAID's work in the Mekong region has been about not just a country, but the Mekong region as a whole. So you look at adaptation both upstream and downstream, and you look at how these countries cooperate. So there's definitely a value add to going through these multilateral agencies. Of course, where countries have the capacity, like in India's case, you can directly access the funds, and that has its own advantages.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, especially the bit about the regional cooperation, cases like the Mekong, because you definitely need it there. I mean, there are some contentious borders and relationships between those countries that sometimes causes them to implement beggar thy neighbor types of policies. So the next question, one of the major pillars of your program is that adaptation and resilience building need to be participatory.
Yep.
And a lot of times we hear that term participatory, it's kind of a buzzword, like sustainability. And so also that resilience needs to be consistent with principles of good governance such as transparency and accountability, which we've discussed. So in other words, adaptation is everyone's responsibility, not just the government.
Yep.
And you kind of touched on bringing the private sector in. What other stakeholders and in what capacity should be involved in building resilience and adaptation?
I mean, you couldn't say it better. It is everybody's responsibility. There's no question about it. Right from the communities, the governments, the private sector, everybody, living in these countries and all over the world, really, climate change adaptation is everybody's responsibility. And the way we look at it is we look at it as different stakeholder groups, and I think the first stakeholder group is the affected community themselves. They have to be there. It's not just about their voice being heard, but it's about bringing in the community in the project design phase. Often, these communities have been dealing with these issues for a long time.
So they know the most about it.
Yeah. This mangrove plantation, whether to let the mangrove regenerate on its own, whether to plant mangroves, often these solutions are very local, and there's a good understanding at the community level to do that.
Sure.
So I think bringing in the communities, I think, is the number one thing. Second, the nonprofit, the NGO world, the nonprofits have been working with communities much before governments got involved in this. And often nonprofits will be the only voice of the vulnerable population groups, the marginalized populations. Women as a group, as a vulnerable group, we look at that very carefully. ADAPT actually has a beyond mainstreaming approach to gender, which really means that it's not just about building gender across all your work, but actually looking at gender in your project prep work and giving it a budget, giving it a specific activity. So it's not just about thinking about gender, it's actually turning gender into an opportunity.
Yeah.
It's actually turning gender into an opportunity. How can you make that a gain for the project, not just a cost?
Sure.
So we look at that, and then the private sector. As I said in the Honda Toyota case, they were willing partners to resilience building in Thailand. And we've seen that in many, Mayor Bloomberg's plan for New York actually has a very large private sector component to it.
Sure.
It's about involving the private sector in everyday resilience building. It's not just about the supply chains. Remember, the people that work for these companies also live in the areas that are affected by climate change.
Right.
So they have an inherent interest in protecting their workforce, their communities. So those are three major stakeholder groups. Of course, the government is a large stakeholder group, and the government really, in some cases, some of the governments that we've worked with are really out there trying to look at these solutions.
Sure. Well, it's really, that's one of the interesting things about adaptation as distinct from mitigation. So long there was a emphasis on mitigation, on decreasing greenhouse gas emissions, which is important, but that's a kind of a national, international scale thing, whereas adaptation is better at the naturally at the local level. Now we have about a minute left, so I'm going to ask you one final question, and that is, what's your ambition and vision? What do you want to see come out of this program?
Well, you call it a buzzword, but sustainability is really the ambition for the project.
Right.
It'll be a shame to see all the work that we've done over the last 4 years, 5 years to just go away. And our approach to that is to work with these regional organizations, whether it's universities, it's local organizations. It's to embed our capacity building initiatives, our training into these organizations so they can continue beyond the life of the project. That these either, like for example, the Institute of Technology Bandung,
Sure.
we did a training with them and
Indonesia.
in Indonesia. And our hope is that these organizations take up these trainings and offer them on a long-term basis.
I
So
see.
governments, individuals can continue to access them much beyond the life of the project.
So institutionalizing the project.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's very interesting, yeah?
Yeah.
Well, that's about all the time we have. Thanks very, very much for being with us today. The time goes by very, very quickly.
Very quickly.
doesn't it? So that's it for ThinkTech this week. So thank you for joining us, and I think I know that we've had a great week. I want to express a very special mahalo to my guest Bikram Ghosh for taking the time to be here, and also I want to express my appreciation and to Jay, Fidel, Zuri, and Sachiko, and Michael for making this show possible. We hope you'll join us again. The next time this program is on, we're going to take a hiatus for some field work in the Philippines and Indonesia. But we'll be back at 4 p.m. on Tuesday for another exciting episode of ThinkTech Asia. Mahalo, aloha, and ahui ho.